All right, welcome to the Pangburn Philosophy Podcast. This is Travis Pangburn. Today I am joined by Dr. Michael Shermer, who is the founding publisher of Skeptic magazine, a monthly columnist for Scientific American, and a presidential fellow at Chapman University, where he teaches Skepticism 101, which the world needs a lot more of. He is also a New York Times best-selling author, his latest hit being Heavens on Earth, the scientific search for the afterlife, immortality, and utopia. Thanks for taking the time today, Michael.
Oh, it's great to be with your new podcast. Very exciting.
Yeah. So I thought we would start with, how is the scientific search for an afterlife going?
Well, as you know, I'm a skeptic, so you might not be surprised to learn that I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetime, if ever. But so there's a couple of angles that I find interesting. The fact that we'd even be searching for it. Not just through religion, which of course we all know about. It's been around for thousands of years, offering various versions of the afterlife as something of a carrot and stick, a heaven and hell kind of thing. And so I do deal with the history of that. But the book is really about scientific attempts to achieve immortality. And I go through all the different scenarios, the transhumanists and the extropians, they're against entropy, the cryonics, people that want to freeze you and bring you back 1,000 years from now or whatever, and especially interesting is the mind uploading. This is the kind of the singularity is near, Ray Kurzweil type scenarios in which they scan and make a copy of your connectome, the analog to your genome, which is all the synaptic connections in your brain that represents your memories that are allegedly stored permanently through these synaptic connections, and then digitize the file. It would be a huge file. In fact, as far as we know from the calculations of how big this file would be, it would take up all the computing power on the entire Earth just for one brain. So it's not likely any one person's going to even make it anytime soon, if that's even you. So that's kind of the main focus of the book.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. About the computing power of the brain, I wonder if there's any way we're ever going to be able to harness that into an energy source. Is that something you've thought about much?
Well, I've read what are essentially sci-fi scenarios of that kind of thing. The problem is as marvelous as a computing device the human brain is, it doesn't generate much energy. You're barely able to do the EEG readings, and it's a tiny amount. It's not going to be useful for any kind of source of energy. But I think what the idea of connectome brings to mind are interesting philosophical problems, like the problem of identity. Who are you? Who are we individually? And as you know, there's quite a strong movement in philosophy and neuroscience that there is no you. The self is an illusion. There's no single, module in the brain that the so-called self sits in and coordinates all the, the different inputs into a single unit. So.
Right. So what is your perspective on that? What side of the fence are you on when it comes to that?
Well, I think the self is an illusion, although like free will, it's a useful fiction. It's a great illusion. It works. I mean, essentially, I am a unit inside my skin, and my brain inside my skull. That is me. We are, as humans are not like a collective superorganism like a tree root system or social insects like bees. We're not like that in terms of how we evolved. So we are individuals, but the neuroscientists who show that the brain is very modular, whether it's the Swiss Army knife analog of the old evolutionary psychologists or their new version, which is like the apps on a phone. There's just hundreds of different apps in the brain that does different things. Facial recognition, language, speech and visual perception, and so on. Just hundreds and hundreds of these things operating, for the most part, independently of each other. And there's that we know of, no like coordination module that puts it all together into a self.
Well, yeah. I mean, when I think about just the basic things that we do as human beings, and I try to boil it down to why we do those things, like what's driving us to get up in the morning, and for me it always just boils down to this pleasure drive that we seem to have to move us from place to place, and some of us find a lot of pleasure in very simple things, and some of us are pleasure junkies where we're just jumping from maximal pleasure to maximal pleasure. Is pleasure the thing that drives us to make us to even move?
Well, it would depend on what you mean by pleasure. I mean, I think most people think of that as just like the morphine drip, or you're on OxyContin and just is flying through life before it all comes crashing down. Most people are not solely motivated by that kind of pleasure. Just, it feels good, makes me happy, it's fun for the moment. But if you mean by pleasure, like Bentham kind of refined his notion of the greatest happiness idea, that being happy may be doing things that are not pleasurable immediately. They're pleasurable down the road, like reading a long book is going to take me days or weeks, and it's a hard slog if it's a difficult science book, but in the end, I feel better at having accomplished it, even though it wasn't fun along the way. Or working out is not fun, but I feel better. The pleasure comes later. It's more of a long-term investment.
Right.
Yeah. So I think if the word is defined broadly enough, yes, I think that's a major motivator.
Right. And so where does this idea, and maybe it's a false idea, of consciousness come into this whole discussion?
Yeah, consciousness. This is a difficult one. I've actually taken the position now of being a Mysterian. The Mysterians are those that say it's not just the hard problem of consciousness and we need to keep working on it. It's an insoluble problem. In fact, my next column in Scientific American is on the Mysterians in three areas: God, free will, and consciousness. So in those, I claim with the consciousness one that it's not even the right question. The hard problem of consciousness. What's it feel like to be something or someone else? I think it's a conceptually problematic question because it can't be answered empirically. There's no test or experiment we can run. So, for example, what it's like to be a bat, Thomas Nagel's famous essay, I claim it's not possible to know, because if you bolted on all the neural structures and giant ears and echolocation systems and wings and all that stuff, at some point you would just be a bat, and you wouldn't be thinking I'm a human inside the bat, and now
Right.
I know what it feels like. So it's still, I think, stuck in the old homunculus idea that there's a little theater in the brain and there's someone in there watching it, and then like what does your red look like, and my homunculus jumps out of my head into your head, and I see on the little Cartesian theater of your mind what your red looks like. Well, this is conceptually completely mistaken, as you know. And so I think the question itself isn't going to get us anywhere. I think it's one of those conceptual mysteries that can never be solved by science.
Yeah, at least it doesn't seem like there's been any progress in trying to nail down like something as broad as what consciousness is. I mean,
right. It's just the so-called easy problem. Tracking the neural networks for speech recognition or perception or whatever. This is what neuroscientists do, and they do it well, and we're making a lot of progress, and that's the route to go. But big philosophical questions: what's it like? What does your red look like? Is it the same as my red? These are conceptually problematic. We can't know. There's no way to know that.
yeah. So I think the pursuit for a utopia is an interesting one when we're these beings just moving around driven by pleasure. And I think it's interesting because we come across many human beings that are driven by different modes of pleasure that a lot of other human beings don't find pleasurable. So is it, I mean, I feel like living in Vancouver, we're almost as close as we're going to get to a utopia here. And we still have people, parents, going around and, genitally mutilating their kids in this version of utopia. Well, I mean, when I look at, we still have a lot of infant circumcisions that are happening.
I was not aware of that.
And
I thought Canada had that, was outlawed that, no?
yeah, no, this the circumcision is still a thing here, and you can
Oh,
have your
yes,
child.
yes. Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, my wife and I just had a son 2 years ago. He just turned two, and we did not circumcise him. And, she's from Germany, and in Europe, this is considered barbaric.
yeah,
And nobody does it there. And I mean, almost no one. And here, I think it is shifting. The numbers I've seen, it's shifting
yeah,
more and more, but, really bumping up against that Judeo-Christian tradition that's been around for so long.
yeah. Well, even when we go back to like the first kind of examples we have of this is going back to the ancient Egyptians, where the priests started doing it not for doctrinal reasons, but they were doing it as a fashion trend. Um, and
Right.
I mean, talk about dedication.
Yeah. But at what age? I
Yeah,
mean, as adults?
well,
As
I
adults, they
think
did it?
as far as I understand, this was happening as adults. But I tend to spend a lot of time on this because I do look at this, and I'm with Joe Rogan on this. There's so many circumcision apologists out there that are otherwise, generally good moral people that they'll say things, say these absurd things like, I had my son circumcised because I wouldn't want to suck on a
God,
uncircumcised dick. Like,
Jesus.
this is the kind of stuff that's said on social media, and you click on these profiles of people, and you expect to see all this like gore porn and like terrible stuff on their wall, but you see these like beautiful families and people, just regular people who are saying things like this. And for circumcision, like, as a general topic, I think it actually makes people go absolutely insane in their mind when they're trying to protect the decision they made, if they happen to have circumcised their child, or protecting the decision their parents made.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's, yeah, I think it's an absolute, um, it's just absolute insanity, and I deal with it lots on my Facebook page and on
I
Twitter.
mean, anybody that would say that about oral sex, fellatio, apparently has not watched how it's done. I mean, that the circumcised, the skin folds down.
Yeah,
The head of the penis is not covered up, and you're okay. Anyway, it's just,
yeah.
yeah, that's just completely ignorant.
Yeah, it's one of those topics where I wish I didn't have to spend so much time on it, because it's just this horrible subject for so many people to discuss, but it's a real problem, and it's a Western problem,
Yeah.
which is kind of unique
Well,
when it comes
Western,
to
yeah, well,
barbaric.
U.S. Western. I mean,
Yeah,
again, Europeans almost never do this. So,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, it's just a tradition. It's just one of those things that, in terms of moral progress, which I like to follow, it's just another one of those things that's going to be hard to fall. But if we, look at, like, say, same-sex marriage, how quickly that came about, I think the whole male circumcision thing can be turned around, in a generation, if we just, keep putting pressure and on new parents, and just, don't do it.
yeah. Well, the percentages are dropping, and I think it's the last estimate was done in maybe 2010, and there's about 33% of the males on this planet have been mutilated at birth. So, I mean, I think a lot of people are shocked by that number in the West, in U.S. and Canada. They expect that number would be a lot more, but I mean, in China and in Japan, this just isn't practiced, and
Yeah.
and it's just
Although I would not equate it with female genital mutilation
no, not at
as,
all.
yeah, yeah, okay, good.
And
Yeah,
that's
because,
something I'm always really clear about, is that,
yeah,
before we start saving these boys from being genitally mutilated, we need to focus on saving
yeah,
women from getting their clitorises chopped off.
yeah, because they have different motives. In the latter, the point is to control the sexual choices and pleasures of women by men, or
Yeah,
by parents or whatever, but mainly men.
yeah, definitely.
And yeah, so, well,
So circumcision and genital mutilation aside, is a do you see a way that a utopia can come about where we're living, you know, kind of like hippies from the 60s, peace, man, everyone's getting along, and no one's
Right.
pissed off at anyone.
I guess you haven't been to Santa Barbara if you say Vancouver's as close to Utopia as you can get. It's pretty nice here.
Yeah.
I think again, it's a little bit like the consciousness thing. It's a conceptual error to conceive of a utopia, because I think Moore had it right with his original novel Utopia, meaning no place, not utopia, like a good place, but just utopia, utopia, and no place. And that's right, because it's not possible to define what a perfect society would be, because there's too much variation in what humans want. So you have to, instead of utopia, I go along with Kevin Kelly's idea of protopia, that is just progress toward a better society, such that in very gradual, incremental, stepwise progress, where tomorrow is just slightly better than today. And that's really what we've experienced since the Enlightenment, is these that I tracked in the moral arc, is just these incremental steps of civil rights and civil liberties, and the abolition of slavery and torture and capital punishment, and children's rights and workers' rights and women's rights and gay rights, and in the direction we're heading, more and more animal rights, and eventually AI or robot rights when AI achieves sentience. And that's kind of how it goes. Let's just see if we can get the murder rates slightly lower next year than they are this year, or fewer wars, or fewer people die in civil wars, and just things like that. And that, as Steve Pinker's tracked as well, is really the mark of a true moral progress. There'll always be enough bad things that happen to fill the evening news, such that if that's all you do is watch the headlines instead of the trend lines, you'll think things are bad and getting worse. But in fact, they're good and getting better.
Right.
And that's the most we can do. And so you have to set up a political system that allows for constant change, such that a liberal democracy, in a way, is like a scientific experiment, where you set it up, you run it for a few years, you tweak the variables, and you run it for a few more years, you tweak the variables, you run it for a few more years, and the tweaking the variables are called elections.
Right. And hopefully
legislation and change the law. So, for example, we have 50 different states in the United States, so we have 50 different social experiments in taxation, gun control laws, these sorts of things. And you can look around. I mean, this is what political scientists and social scientists do, is they compare data sets. Now, this is difficult to do. I mean, like we did an issue of Skeptic on gun control, and oh man, this is a tangled mess of statistical analyses depending on who's doing it. But for the most part, you can see which kinds of gun control measures have the best effect toward reducing the number of homicides and suicides by gun. And so from that, we can learn and go, okay, this seems to be working better here than over there, so let's try more of this one.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, so on the gun issue, what is the best answer to these shootings?
There is no good answer for a couple of reasons. One, the Second Amendment's never going to be overturned. And the last two Supreme Court cases, particularly Heller in 2008, pretty much locked that down with handguns being protected. And there's 350 million guns, and so there's more than one gun per person in the United States, and we're never going to get them back. So that's over, that's gone. And so the probabilities of somebody getting a gun who's mentally ill, crazy, mad, whatever, you can't stop that. So, and there are no gun control measures, even on the books, that could stop the random, the black swan effect of a school shooting every so many weeks per year. That you can't do anything about that.
Right.
And so all we can do is try to reduce the carnage by, I think, restricting the size of the magazines, how many bullets you can shoot before you have to reload, and in the reload moment there's a chance to stop the shooter. But those sorts of things, background checks. People that have had restraining orders put on them. These are mostly women victims of domestic violence, and I mean, most women that die by gun are shot by their significant others or partners.
Right.
And so those are the sorts of things that aren't going to they're not going to stop it, but they're going to reduce the carnage, I think, is the best we can do at this point.
You mentioned Steven Pinker. You have an event with him in Montreal on September 16th, and that's produced by us at Pangburn Philosophy. What are you looking to get out of that event? What are you excited to speak to Steve about?
Well, I think Steve and I share much of our worldviews, so it's not like it's going to be me and a creationist or me and or a climate denier, for sure. And Steve and I are longtime good friends, and I just finished the Enlightenment Now. I reviewed it for Science, and I think it's a fantastic book. I think one of the things we might discuss is this new phenomenon of the intellectual dark web, which was published by Barry Weiss in the New York Times today. That I'm featured in along with others that you well know.
Yeah,
Sam.
I saw that article. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, so I think like a hard problem there for us is, who's a legitimate voice in the conversation. And if we say, well, we'll talk to anybody, Joe Rogan, for example, he'll talk to anybody. He'll talk to Alex Jones or whatever. I don't think I would do that because people like Alex Jones or Milo, if someone is just intentionally disruptive just for the sake of disrupting things, and you don't actually know what they believe. Like, I have no idea what Alex Jones really believes.
Yeah.
As far as I know, the whole thing could be a put on. I mean, he in his divorce trial, he called himself a performance artist. This whole thing is a joke. He might have been saying that because of the divorce proceedings.
Well, and he presents as a caricature. Like he just everything he does is a caricature.
Yeah, I mean, but at least Colbert, for example, was honest about it in the Colbert Report. He was honest. I'm playing a fake conservative, and so everybody was in on the joke. That may not be the case always with people like Alex Jones or Milo. I think Milo's conservative, but I really don't know.
Yeah.
And so, there needs to be some. Free speech doesn't mean every single person who wants to have a platform has to be invited to speak at Harvard or Berkeley. There's simply not enough days in the year to host that many people. So you have to be somewhat discriminatory based on hopefully they have some credentials to speak, or they have some integrity, or I'm not. So that would be a hard one. Like, how do we know?
Yeah. Well, I think it depends on what the subject is. It's like if the discussion is humanism, I don't think there's a terminal degree in humanism. So it's like most people should be able to discuss humanism, but if it's a discussion on evolution at Harvard University, you would expect a Brett Weinstein or a Richard Dawkins.
Right, someone with training and does it for a living. Yeah. And I could see that. One of my recent Scientific American column, I wrote about utilitarianism and Kant's deontology. In the context of every month, I have a column, and I have to come up with something new. Like, is there some new study, a survey, a published paper, a book, some event that happened? Or else, why am I writing about it? And then tie it into some, deeper theoretical issue related to science somehow. So anyway, I was just happened to be reading this paper on utilitarianism by some scholars, Kahan at Oxford University and his colleagues, and they were kind of complaining that utilitarianism has gotten a bad rap because it's always focused on the sacrificial aspects of utilitarianism, like in the trolley problem. Is it okay to sacrifice the one to kill the five, that kind of thing.
Right.
And so in their paper, they say, hey, that's the dark side of utilitarianism. There's a good side, and so that's what the paper was about. So I wrote about that and then basically, said, well, I like the idea of natural rights, and I said a few things about that. Well, anyway, Massimo Pigliucci and a few other professional moral philosophers were not too amused at an amateur like me. I'm a historian of science. I have, I've read. I'm able to read the, Bentham and Mill and Kant and so on, but I didn't spend 6 years getting a PhD in it, so I could kind of see why they'd be a little miffed, like, how come Shermer is commenting on this? What does he know? And, but on the other hand, if you're credentialed and you're a professional, moral philosophy is not like quantum physics. I mean, I can't read quantum physics. But I can read moral philosophy. I think I understand the difference between act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism, and weak rule utilitarianism versus strong rule utilitarianism, and the difference between strong rule utilitarianism and Kantian deontology. But to me, they all start to blend into one another, with all these labels, and and so this is one reason why I went into science instead of philosophy.
Yeah, well, I would rather, these other intellectuals go after why your argument is wrong, as opposed to, this argument from authority saying that you don't have the authority on the issues to.
Right.
Um,
Well, Massimo did, to his credit. When I called him out for that, he said, "All right," so he blasted me with a pretty strong critique. Fine,
right,
that's fine.
right,
And so we went back and forth a couple of times, and that's all published online. But yeah, but that is the way to do it. I mean, Massimo and I are friends, and
right.
this is the idea of the intellectual dark web, and the kind of stuff that you're doing, putting on public events, and Joe Rogan does, and Dave Rubin does, is just people that don't agree with each other talk to each other.
Right.
And in a couple of days, I'm sitting down with Ben Shapiro for an hour for his Ben Shapiro Sunday new Sunday show he's doing.
Oh, right on. I look forward to hearing that.
In-depth conversations. Yeah, his first guest, Jordan Peterson, and I think I'm his second or third guest. Anyway, he's pro-life and I'm pro-choice. I'm going to see if I can swing him over.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
I probably won't, and we'll shake hands and have a good time. But I'm gonna try, and anyway, so.
Yeah, he's quite a crafty debater. That guy.
He's a fast talker.
He's a fast talker, and you got a
silver-tongued devil.
Silver-tongued devil, and Peterson, he's got that quality as well. One thing I've noticed by hanging out with Jordan a bit.
Oh, he does. Yes. No, he's very good. He knows what he's doing on stage. He's a masterful presenter and rhetorician.
Yeah.
That's a skill. People think all you have to do is have some good ideas or be able to think clearly. No, presentation, like the ability to write or speak or be funny or be clever or witty. People think, oh, who's Bill Nye, the science guy, to be on TV all the time, or Neil deGrasse Tyson? He's not a real scientist. Hey, you try going on TV and seeing if you can explain this in 3 minutes while your host is interrupting you, or the audience is interrupting you, or can you really communicate these and be clever, be funny, be witty, be sharp, have snappy comebacks and repertoire and dialogue. Can you do it?
Yeah.
Most people can't do it. It's a skill.
And a lot of people can't do it when they don't have when they don't have to rely on empirical evidence as the thing that you're presenting. It's like comedians can write their stuff about anything, but when you're trying to, bring some humor into empirical data and the scientific method, it makes it that much harder.
You should book a live show with me and Ben Shapiro, or me and Dennis Prager. I was, Rubin did a show with me and Prager, the conservative radio guy, and he's also very sharp. He may be every bit as good as Shapiro. He's a lot older and has been doing this for decades. And his his knowledge of the Old Testament is pretty extensive. But again, I like I said, I think on Rubin's show that I'm not sure I could beat Ben Shapiro in a debate, but I could tie him. I'm pretty sure I could tie him. Yeah. Whatever that means in a debate. Yeah. But some of these things I think don't have the correct answers. Like when I debate a creationist or a climate denier, I can just whip them with facts. Yeah. But things like abortion or what the difference between right and wrong and how you really know. Some of the big philosophical issues. They don't have a simple right answer. Like it's 400 parts per million of CO2 gases going up to 500 parts per million by 2100. Therefore, boom, done. It's not like that with abortion or gun control.
No, there's it's definitely not the same deal when talking about those issues. There's, I've heard, when I hear an issue come up and I hear two great arguments on opposite sides of the debate, then I typically am really interested in those topics, because then we got one that's really worth debating.
Yeah, that's right. Although, it's not always the case that there's two sides to every story. Again, like with climate.
Yeah,
with the climate debate, whenever you see these things on TV, it's always the same one or two so-called climate skeptics, because there aren't very many. There's only a couple, and that's a sign that there's something there's a strong scientific consensus. If 99% of scientists are on one side of thing, they're probably right. Now, it's not always the case. Sometimes the majority is wrong, but usually not. Usually the majority are there's a good reason why there's a consensus. And it's
Yeah.
not like a democracy where, we all meet on the weekend and vote to see if climate change is real or not.
Yeah.
It's that there's an independent corroboration. There's different lines of inquiry from completely different fields, geography and geology and climate science and ecology and, the study of glaciers and on and on and on. And these people, they don't even know each other. They don't go to the same conferences. They publish in different journals, and yet they're all coming to the same conclusion.
Right.
That should give us confidence that the whole thing is probably on the right track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it mostly conspiracy thinking that's keeping, these large groups of people from accepting climate science?
Yeah, not conspiracy. It's more a political signaling, virtue signaling for your political tribe. So, for example, when a conservative hears climate change or global warming, their brain autocorrects that to anti-capitalism, anti-free market, big government intervention into the marketplace and the economy. And they're not thinking parts per million of CO2 gases. They're thinking government regulation of industry. And that's against my core principles of what I believe. So therefore I'm against it. And they do the same thing. Religious conservatives do the same thing with evolution. They don't hear about punctuated equilibrium or DNA testing and comparing across species. They don't know anything about that or care about it. It's that Darwinism equals atheism equals lack of morality equals communism and then their brain just explodes and goes, no, it can't be right.
Yeah.
And liberals do the same thing on other issues, like nuclear power, for example, or GMOs. I mean, GMOs is one of the great things to lift people out of poverty, stop the hunger and starvation of hundreds of millions of people. But they just don't think clearly on those things. But surveys show that conservatives and liberals equally support science in all other areas that are not hot button issues.
Right. Yeah, it seems like once they start affecting you right now, it's like with medical science. It's you're gonna spend your last breath dialing 911 when you get in a car accident, as opposed to spending that last breath praying. I think
Right.
most people are gonna take that option.
That's right. Yeah, they can. Yeah, you can pray for me when I'm in the ambulance on my way to the best medical technology that's available.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I did want to talk about AI. So when I sit at a bar with Sam Harris, and we're just generally talking, and we're just shooting the shit, and then once we get on the subject of AI, there is this massive shift in him, and things become very serious. And he is legitimately terrified of what can happen, along with Elon Musk and a few others, maybe even the majority. And I think, and a guy like Steve Pinker kind of like maybe chuckles a bit at that and says that there's any great engineer who would be able to design an artificial intelligence would design it properly so that it wouldn't overthrow us. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with Pinker on this. I wrote about this in Skeptic. We did a whole issue on, is AI a threat or not, and I had pro and con, and it was a great debate. But I'm with Pinker on this, that it's not an existential threat. First of all, we have to quit using that word. It's so overused. Existential threat. Everything is an existential threat. I mean, like terrorism. We did another issue of Skeptic on that, and the idea that, let's say the worst case scenario, ISIS got a nuke and detonated it in New York City.
Right.
And, millions were killed. Do you think President Trump or whoever, Obama, any president, is just going to hand the keys over to ISIS and go, well, you know what? We're licked.
Did it.
It's all yours. Yeah, you did it.
Yeah.
You can have the country. No.
Yeah.
Okay. And same thing with, AI. At some point, the Tesla leaps up onto the sidewalk and mows down pedestrians because you programmed it to get you to LAX as quickly as possible and there was traffic. The moment that happened, you think government regulators are not going to leap on Musk and go, hey, if this happens again, we're shutting you down.
Yeah.
And, so he calls his engineers in there and go, hey, we need, double reduction safety systems on our brakes or whatever, so that this never happens again. And that's how technologies evolve. Kevin Kelly makes this point beautifully that Pinker summarizes in Enlightenment Now, that the more complex the technology, the more potentially dangerous it is. The more people are involved in it, the more complex the systems are. Therefore, the harder it would be for like a terrorist to get it, or for one single unit to have a runaway effect and take over the world or turn the entire planet into paper clips, or whatever your scenario is.
Right.
It's just I'm not worried about it. I mean, I lived through the Y2K thing, and it was the exact same kinds of conversations on the evening news every night. It's coming, it's coming. Oh my God, the whole thing is going to. President Clinton's on there going, oh, we have to do something, and all our top scientists say this is going to happen, and nothing happened. And that's usually how it goes.
I still don't get what the hell people thought was going to happen with that, with Y2K.
Well, it was that when we hit 2000, that it would click back to 1900, and the programs would quit running, and planes would fall out of the sky, and hospital units would be turned off, and people would die, and just none of that happened. I think it was just all over. Typically, that's almost all these kinds of existential threat scenarios are almost always along those lines, that they're too exaggerated. Not that we shouldn't pay attention. I mean, if you want computer scientists, go ahead and take credit for it. It's like, yeah, it didn't happen because we did something about it. Okay, fine. But and some companies did, but most middle-sized to small companies and businesses, they did nothing to do anything about it. They couldn't afford to call in a team of computer scientists to worry about this. So they did nothing, and nothing happened to them. So it appears it was all overblown, and I strongly suspect that's the case. And even though there are some high-profile people like Musk and Bill Gates and Stephen Hawking and so on, and Sam, but most people like Eric Schmidt at Google, he said, not worried about it. And I suspect most people at Microsoft that are just sitting there working, they're not worried about it.
Yeah, and I guess one of the fears is that some kind of AI technology would be created, and then all of a sudden we'd lose touch with it, and it would go through the internet and create other shit, and it would create this, and then all of a sudden, before we knew it, it would be widespread. But I mean, to me, it just sounds like fantasy.
I think so. Yep, it's like a science fiction scenario, and okay, granted, the AI doomsayers are not going the Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator route. They recognize that's Hollywood baloney, and their arguments are much more subtle and interesting and important. But still, I just don't think it's there. Sam he's really good at thought experiments. This is what he is trained in. He does it really well. He's incredibly articulate. But I think Pinker matched him sentence for sentence in their discussion. I don't know if this is a Pangburn event or not, but this is online for Steve's book, Enlightenment Now. And so they got into that toward the end.
Yeah.
It's perfect. I mean, Steve matched him point for point, and you can take your pick who you thought won or whatever, but I think Pinker made the stronger point that it's not an existential threat. The fact that people take it seriously enough to talk about it, and maybe this does have an effect on the programmers or government regulators, before they turn loose automatic driving cars and so on, there'll be enough checks and balances. But this idea again, like the trolley problem, the Tesla's driving along, there's 5 people in the sidewalk or in the crosswalk, there's 2 people in the crosswalk, but there's 3 passengers in the car, so it's better to kill the 2. Okay, how about you just have better sensors and better brakes, and then nobody dies.
Right.
That's the technology is the solution to a lot of I think ethical issues.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about this God character.
God, yes.
Yes. So is the world becoming more secular? I think it is.
Oh yeah, so for sure. I mean, we've known for about 5 years now that the rise of the nuns is a real effect. That is, the people who tick the box for no religious affiliation. That is a third. It's 25% of all Americans and a third of millennials, people born after 1980. And now it's going to be about probably 50% of iGeners once they they get up to age of in their 20s and 30s when they would become religious. They won't. So the trends, like most of these demographic trends, older people are slower to change. Like with gay rights, for example, it's mainly supported by millennials and resisted by baby boomers and older. But that's the way it's going for the nuns. Now, the nuns are not necessarily atheist, agnostic, skeptics. They're not leaping into membership of the Skeptics Society and Skeptic Magazine. A lot of them are going to the Deepak Chopras of the world. They tick the box, spiritual but not religious, on the dating sites, for example. And that's a good proxy for. I think the effect is they still think there's something going on. In Heavens on Earth, they reported on this massive survey, huge survey of Americans. Again, it was like 10% said they're atheist, and of those, about a third said they believe in the survival of consciousness after death. Now, they don't think they're going to sit next to Jesus in heaven with God. But there's something. Now, they didn't ask, so I don't know what they're thinking, but they're probably thinking something like a Buddhist idea of consciousness. Everything is consciousness. So consciousness, like Deepak says, when you die, you just return to where you were before you were born, which is consciousness. And or something like a scenario of Ray Kurzweil and the uploading the mind into the cloud. There's something like a universal cloud that your consciousness returns to. I think a lot of these atheist or secular millennials, the nuns, I think they're still clinging on to something like that.
Yeah, I think in general it's a difficult concept to realize that you're going to die.
Well, you can't conceive of it, because to conceive of something you have to be alive. So when I say conceive of being dead, it'd be like imagine being unconscious.
Right.
Well, I can't, because I'm conscious.
Yeah, all I think
I have to be conscious.
All I think when you say that is blackness.
Yeah, blackness, right? Or it's like anybody who's gone under general anesthesia, they have you count a few numbers and it's just boom, boom, lights out, and that's it. And that's probably what death is like. Now, if it's true that after that, for me, I wake up and whatever that means, consciousness, and I'm in this other place, and there's my friends Carl Sagan and Stephen Jay Gould and my parents and so on. It's like, okay, well, this is cool. I didn't know this, but all right.
Yeah.
Now can I go back and rewrite a new addition to my book, which I said this was all bullshit?
Yeah.
Probably not, but so I'm not against the idea of there being an afterlife. It'd be fine. Not the afterlife like the Christian religion portrays, which I think would be incredibly boring. Christopher Hitchens called it the celestial North Korea. You have this dictator that knows everything and knows all your thoughts and controls everything you do. That does not sound heavenly to me.
Yeah, and Hitch always followed that up by saying, and at least in North Korea, you can fucking die.
That's right. You can't even leave the party in the Christian scenario.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, and I thought for the last topic here, I thought we should touch on energy. Have you covered at Skeptic nuclear power?
We haven't done an issue on that. That is something I want to address soon, because I do think that's the answer to our energy issues. I'm worried about that Germany and France, for example, are now going backwards on that issue because of the Fukushima incident. And this is, again, part of this whole existential threat fears that people have that are irrational.
Yeah.
That is, in terms of like 3 Mile Island, no one died. Chernobyl, I don't know, it was like 50 to 100 people, maybe tops died, and cancer rates in the area went up just barely measurable statistically, barely in the noise above the background rate of cancer.
Right.
Before Chernobyl and Fukushima, the major problem was not the plant, but the water, just the safety mechanisms around the plant,
right,
and storms and so on. So that we have to go that route, because if you look at the number of people who die related to coal, for example, we just have gotten used to that. Yeah. And as if that if one person dies in a nuclear accident, then we have to shut the whole thing down. And yet we're just used to thousands of people getting black lung disease or industrial accidents and so on, and we just accept that because we're used to it.
I mean, I almost think we need to rename it. instead of nuclear power, we can call it like bright power or something. I
Yeah,
just think a new name would do that very well because
that's a good idea.
because
Yeah, let's.
I agree that because when people hear the word nuclear, they shit themselves and they think these giant explosions and killing millions of people, so their minds just shut down. But I
Well, it touches some psychology of fear that it's invisible. You can't see it, can't
yeah
taste it, can't smell it. It's like preternatural poison that's different from anything else that kind of touches some of those psychological fears we have about the dark, about the unseen, and uncontrollable. And then of course the major story with the 3 Mile Island is that movie China Syndrome came out just the week before that happened, and that so that again, no one died in 3 Mile Island, but people just saw that film, and movies have an incredible way of touching people's fears and emotions. Hollywood has really got it dialed in exactly how to the right music and the right edits to get you to be afraid of something, and they did that with the China Syndrome. And so ever since then, nuclear power plants. I mean, nuclear power plants. The second generation now. There's third and fourth generations proposed, and people working on these smaller units. I'm especially encouraged that Stuart Brand, the Whole Earth Catalog guy, is super hardcore green environmentalist, but he's totally in favor of nuclear power, and having those kind of people on our side is good.
yeah and I think I would urge people who are interested in investing their money into new energy sources to really take a look at nuclear power and the pros and cons to it. And I think you'll see pretty quickly that it is a great resource.
We got to do it. I mean, the fossil fuel, in terms like the 10,000 years of human history, civilization, for example, I think fossil fuels is just going to be a short little window. It's the same thing with electric cars. I mean, they've been around since the 1910s. There were as many electric taxis as gas-powered taxis in New York City in the 1920s. But because of just the history and the unfolding of who got a market head start and so on, the research and development of battery technology, for example, just lay dormant. And it was because of Musk.
Yeah.
Just making a cool car. I drive a Tesla. I'm never going back. I mean, I haven't been in a gas station in 3 years.
Yeah.
And now I see driving around next to me a Model 3 that's better than my Model S at half the price.
Yeah.
In 3 years.
It's unbelievable.
And, yeah, and my car goes 250 miles on a charge. The Model 3 goes 300 miles on a charge. This is how it's going to go. And they're all doing it now.
Yeah.
They have to, market forces. Ford, GM, BMW, Porsche, they're all coming out with super cool cars that go fast and they go far. And I was thinking about, and with the self-driving aspect as well, I was thinking about this. My 2-year-old son, he may never drive a car.
Yeah.
In 15 years, when he could get his driver's license, he may not need one.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
I know it. So the whole thing with driving cars may be a window of maybe 150 years in all of human history. It wasn't there, then it was there for this short window, and now it's gone.
Yeah. That's
wild.
fascinating. Well, thanks so much for chatting with me today, Michael.
All right, Travis, good conversation.
Yeah, it's been an honor having you on, and I look forward to seeing you in Montreal September 16th with Mr. Pinker.
Should be epic.
Yeah, it will be for sure. All right, and everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been the Pangburn Philosophy Podcast, and let art and science inspire.